You're actually streaming instead of like
Yeah.
instead of recording it and streaming it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just more convenient.
All right.
And we've already started, I guess. So, hello everyone. I'm here with Matthew Davidson. He is an electronic musician and he's an associate professor
Correct.
in the electronic production and design department at Berklee College of Music. Thanks for being here, Matthew. I know you biked here. When did that start?
So first of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. I biked here, and I've been biking to Berklee basically since I started. I did some commuting on the T, and I lived previously in Central Square, which is a lot closer to than where I live right now. And every time I got on the bus and I would go by Central Square, I kind of like look wistfully at Central Square. And I decided, when I was still teaching part-time, that I would figure out a better way to deal with the commute. And I've been carless in Boston since since the 1990s. But I had the privilege of being able to walk to my previous job. And so then after that, my next job was working for a remote company, so I was at home, kind of there all the time. And so getting to Berklee was a problem that I needed to address, and that's when I started biking. And it's been like 10 years now, like year-round biking. I read online, people are like, what do you do when it snows? Like as if it's an unsolvable problem. Like, no, I bike year-round. It's totally okay. And I'm at this point I'm 54, and there's a lot of benefits that I've seen from biking. Like one is when I get to school, I'm awake. I'm ready to teach. When I come in the door, like, let's go. So there's none of this like kind of like waking up and getting acclimated. I don't know. I feel the blood moving. So it definitely does have an impact on my health. But mainly it is what I try to do is address my head, because when I'm in a car or when I'm waiting at the bus stop, there's all this anxiety that like creeps in and has the potential to like overtake. And I wanted to get rid of that anxiety. And so if I have the ability to control when I leave and when I arrive, and that's completely under my control, then that took this thing that was causing me to have some displeasure in my life and turned it into something that was, a positive. So I don't bike because I love biking. I bike because I'm trying to keep myself sane.
Well, I think that's yet another thing I can relate with, because I would love to bike more often, and I aspire to do that at some point. So that is pretty cool. Like the whole bit about anxiety, and I think I relate with that for sure. I want to take you back to your Berklee days, because you went to Berklee, and I read online that you still remember the night you were exposed to Max.
Yeah.
And I guess it would have been Mass Ave. You were on Mass Ave, and I think you were looking into the sky and just wondering how far Max could have gone in your career, like how much Max could have been a part in your artistic career. Do you remember the kinds of things you were thinking about at the time?
I think that you nailed like all the points of that. But first of all, let me say I was exposed to Max through Dr. Boulanger at Berklee. Dr. Boulanger is still teaching, and it was definitely one of those moments where I was like, I don't know where the end of this is. I can't see the end. Like I could plot this out. Like I don't know when I'm going to get tired of this. And that was kind of like the feeling. It wasn't like I'm overwhelmed by the possibilities. It was like I know I can do this now, and I know I can do some of this later. But then I really don't see the end of it. And I kind of feel the same way about jiu-jitsu, because when I was doing some other martial arts, I was trying some other things, and it did seem like what I was doing was limited. Like I definitely saw the end of it. And when I started doing jiu-jitsu, it was like all the moves to the counter moves. Like, I don't see the end of this. So like jiu-jitsu is the same thing. Like, I don't know. I could do this for the rest of my life. And Max was also one of those things. Like, I could definitely do this for the rest of my life. There's definitely a lot of possibilities here that I don't think I could, expend all of my time exploring and be satisfied.
Do you remember any other things that made you feel the same way? Sometimes I feel that way about coding and generative music, for instance, but I also feel that way about the piano and maybe just practicing rhythms or something like that. So I relate with the idea of seeing how far you could take something, some kind of a practice. Were there any other musical things that interested you at the time or provoked you in the same way?
Electronic music has always been this thing that seemed limitless to me because it was not really defined by what you could do. Yeah. Like it was very open-ended, and I think there's a lot of other disciplines that have some inherent boundaries. Like as soon as you step outside of this boundary, then you're no longer doing that thing anymore. And electronic music's so young that it doesn't really seem to have like built up these walls to say, now you're not doing electronic music anymore. Yeah. There's so many things about it that look so expansive and tantalizing. But there wasn't like a moment where I was exposed to electronic music where I had that like, I could do this for the rest of my life. Those moments are I think kind of rare. They feel kind of rare. I've been exposed to a lot of technology where I've touched on that a little bit. Like this seems kind of limitless, but in general, I think like the Monum was one of those things where like I don't know if it was endless, but I definitely could not enumerate all the different things that I would want to do with it. And that's really interesting because like if we think about the Monum starting about 2005, it's been almost 20 years with that particular device because it had no preconceived notion about how it was supposed to be interfaced with. I see your point about any musical instrument and the piano. The keyboard's an interesting interface to me, but as a child growing up, I was always interested in timbre associated with that keyboard. And so before synthesizers were a thing, it was organs. Like I was really interested in just standard organs. Like what do all those drawbars do? Like how do you change the sound? And like how can you use that to express yourself? Keyboard was always like a pathway to access timbre and sound, and that kind of naturally grew into synthesizers.
I really want to get to that, but since we were on the topic of your college education, I know you also pursued film scoring.
Yeah.
What was that like, and how did that affect your trajectory?
When I was going to be a film composer because that's what I chose as my major when I got to Berklee. And the reason I chose it as a major because I enjoyed composing music, and at the time it seemed like I would meet like 10 musicians and there would only be like one composer in that group. And I don't think that's really I don't think that's held up these days. I think there's a lot more people that can compose. It's a lot more accessible. And I think that owes to the technology that's going on right now because I came from a cohort in the 80s that learned how to compose through being exposed to a computer. And I think a lot of people have computers now, and so there's a lot of people that are composing. But I was at the beginning of that. A natural application of the desire to compose things at that time was film composition. And the other thing about that was whenever people listened to things I made, which was largely instrumental because I didn't really have the ability to record audio, people would say, "Oh, that sounds like film music." And I think that in retrospect, it wasn't because it sounded like film music, but more that today, or in that day, the music that most people were exposed to as instrumental music was film music. And so maybe it's a little bit of both of these, but it was like, here's what I like to do. Here's a practical application of it. Today, we have more opportunities for scoring to screen. So you can be scoring for video games. You can be scoring for all types of interactive media, not just film. But that's the extension of what I did as a film composing major. And I remember, in the film scoring department, by the way, today it was a notification Michael Rendish died. Michael Rendish passed away. So not Michael Rendish was one of my teachers in the film scoring department, but he also had a role in starting the electronic music department at Berklee. So a moment of appreciation, a moment of silence for Michael Rendish. But when I was in the film scoring department, one of the things I remember I was doing, I was editing mag on 16 millimeter stock on a flatbed Moviola, and at the time, I got good at it too. Like, I'm never gonna use this. It got really good, but it's one of those things where like we're learning this technology, and I'm never gonna be able to apply the technology. So what I'm getting at is that there was this link between composition and the practical application of it, and so that was then, and this is today. Scoring for screen. And when I got to my senior year at Berklee, that's when I transitioned to being a dual major. I got involved in the music synthesis department, and so at the end of that year, I was like, okay, I got to decide what I'm going to do. And I remember there was a film scoring internship that would require me to go out to LA that I applied for. Fingers crossed, let's see if I can get this internship, and I didn't. And so if I had, I would have gone out to LA, and that would have been a completely different trajectory in my life. I don't know where I would be at that point. Maybe I would be out there, scoring movies. But instead, I got more interested in synthesis and decided to go to grad school. So if the question was like, what happened? Or yes, like, I chose this major. So I actually did end up, spending a lot of my time in the 90s, especially doing scoring, doing small films and things in the area, doing what I would call industrial music. And interestingly, one of the people that I went to school with was BT, Brian Tranzo. He was doing a lot of industrial music at that time too. I was like, dude, get me some of those gigs as well. He never did. And then he ended up like at the end of the semester he ended up like packing up an S900. He's like, I'm going to West Coast. I'm going to LA. And like I didn't see him again until like many years later. But that type of work that I was doing for scoring these industrial movies, that type of work kind of like dried up at a very specific moment, and I tie that moment to video editors. The people that did that kind of stuff got savvy to making their own music due to time stretching, and the tool was Sony Acid at the time. It was before Ableton Live or whatever, but that's when it was like, oh, if I just need some like simmering stuff in the background, I don't need to actually hire a film composer to do this. I can do this myself, and so that stuff and kind of ended, but that was fun while I did it.
You mentioned that when people heard your music, they equated it to like film music because it was instrumental. Would you say like the general public still perceives instrumental music as film music? Because when I think of the kind of music I heard growing up, maybe a lot of it was completely instrumental. Certainly like a lot of electronic styles come to mind, where there's no vocals, like progressive house or like Deadmau5 or whoever. I can also think of like instrumental metal bands and things like this. Would you say people still think instrumental music sounds like film music, or do you think that has changed since your college days?
I think it's the same and different. I think what people say today, and I didn't really get to this, is when people hear instrumental music, what they say is like, oh, this sounds like video game music. And it doesn't have to be like 8-bit music. That's not what I'm talking about, because the breadth of music that's in video games is incredibly large. Like it spans all genres of instrumental music. And so now I don't get like people listen to this and it sounds like film music. What they say is it sounds like video game music because that's what they're exposed to. And when I say this, I'm talking about the general public, not someone who's planning to go into the EPD department. So the stuff that you were listening to, you know, is probably atypical for the general public. I'm talking about like the general public, when they hear instrumental music today, they're going to say that sounds like video game music.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess it's hard to tell what's atypical or not typical if you're in a niche kind of environment, or like if you have niche listening habits. I want to talk about personality traits and electronic music making, because I know you grew up playing with MIDI. And that's sort of how you like not like the technology itself, but maybe like note editors on your computer and things like that. How do you think personality traits, in particular things like, I don't know, introversion and things like that, how do you think they contribute to music making methods?
Well, first of all, when you get into the EPD department, we issue a cat. So that's one of the personality traits. Everyone has to have a cat. I don't know if you notice this online, but it's required. There's a personality trait for people who have cats as well. Anyway, I think it would be. I mean, I've been doing this for 10 years, and I've definitely seen the students that I get through our department. And I don't think I'm going to issue any, broad proclamations about what I think the personality type is. I can only speak from personal experience. And this is relevant to something I'm seeing going on today. When I was learning how to compose music, as we already covered, I was interacting with the computer. And one of the reasons why that was appealing for me and why it's kind of different than what we have now is like I could bounce ideas off the computer. I could put notes on a staff and it would play it back. But the key thing is that it would do it without judgment. And if this idea of like if I didn't know how to write music, like if I had some ideas, I didn't know how to actually put it on a page, I would have to interact with another musician or a composer or a teacher and say, can you tell me what this sounds like? Can you check this? Right. And it's that fear of vulnerability, of putting yourself out there when you want to do it over and over and over again and have that cycle where you're getting feedback of what you actually did. To do it without judgment with a computer, I definitely was like the first cohort of people to do this. And so that's what I mean. Like I learned how to compose music by drawing dots on a page and then having the computer play it back to me. Now we have a lot more options, piano roll or event lists or whatever. And what I'm seeing today, and this is not strictly related to music, is now if you have an idea in any field, any discipline, you can start a dialogue with ChatGPT or AI in general. Right. And when I'm getting in with AI, I have a lot of thoughts on AI, but one of the things that I'm finding for me personally is that I remember what it was like composing music with a computer, with it not judging me by asking ChatGPT stupid questions. Like I should know the answer to this. And it's different than like searching Google. Like it's a little bit more personal. It feels like a little bit more like I'm getting better interaction, but it's still not being judgmental. In fact, it feels kind of supportive. Like whenever you change your mind, it's like, well, that's a great idea. Yeah, or like, well, that's, and it feels kind of, there's this affirmation that happens when you're doing that. So what I'm trying to do here is draw a parallel between me composing music in the 1980s on a computer and what's happening now with ChatGPT, and wondering if there's just like, due to the accessibility and broadening of the scope, what's going to happen 20 years from now? What are these students going to be like?
I'm glad you mentioned the feedback loop, because it's something I guess I took for granted, because my only form of music making for a long time was just DAWs, and it was only till I maybe like started writing music by hand that I felt like that feedback loop is something really crucial. And I'm also happy you brought up AI. I will confess that I'm not like I'm not super educated on the topic, but I would love for you to share your thoughts about how AI would um, contribute to people's music making.
Um, I don't. I see AI as the continuation of what's been happening since the 80s, like since I've actually been aware of music technology. Um, and I'll say that AI itself, it's just like autocomplete. What we have right now is like autocomplete, and artistically speaking or musically speaking, it's just going to give you what the most high percentage suggestions of what comes after this thing that you've actually put in, and that's a recipe for like it's not a recipe for good music. And it also is going to be limited by what it's been trained on. Like it can't create new music. It can just kind of like remix things from the past. I'm not. So let me get back to like this progression of technology. So I don't. AI in and of itself, the way it is right now, is just like the natural progression of like samplers are going to destroy music and MIDI is going to destroy music and like all these things are going to destroy music. The thing that I'm scared about with AI is not AI itself. It's what happens when you bind capitalism with AI. And that is scary to me. Like I'm scared of like the natural endpoint of capitalism, not really scared of like the technology that we have access to. I think I've definitely found it useful and I know what its limitations and its current state are. But what I'm seeing is more about society and like the kind of world that we're living in right now. In the 80s, there were all these jobs that were musically adjacent in Boston. So I could make a living in Boston in the 80s and the 90s where I would be interacting with musicians in the area. I would be designing artwork and flyers and album covers and tape covers. You could make a job duplicating tapes. You can have a job working in a production studio, in a MIDI studio. You could work in a music store and make contacts. There were 5 music stores around Berklee and Mass Ave that were hangout spots that were just amazing. There was just absurd number of record stores. I would just make a lap around the area, and I could hit a half dozen used record stores and like get exposed to all sorts of things that I would never have found otherwise. But there was all these people working those jobs, and what I'm seeing today is a gig economy where like nobody has any sort of protection. Everyone's like working to the next paycheck. And then things like AI are being used in a very aggressive capitalist way to deprive artists of income that they probably would have had in these older days that I'm describing. But it's not AI; it's just the progression of technology. And it's the progression of like what type of world we're living in.
I think that's insightful because it seems like most opinions about AI don't have too much to do with like the artistic process or the technical process of making music, but it's more so the ethical impacts that it could have on people. Would you say that that's the kind of thing you're going for?
In terms of how I'm describing AI?
Or your concerns with AI?
My concerns with AI are strictly about the people who are controlling the AI or people who are using AI to put more money in their pocket. I don't have any. Like being against AI for myself would be like being against samplers or being like, but I am against, like I do draw a distinction between how I feel like this technology is going to be used and how that will impact and take away like huge swaths of income for musicians. So for example, like we as musicians are trying to, especially if we came up with this idea like I have the right to sell music, and it's true, you do have the right to sell music. It's just that like the kinds of work that I was getting as a film composer that got dried up because of technology, there's huge swaths of like technology where your deliverable is a recording that aren't going to exist anymore because of how people use music. And so part of the way that we used music before, or how we're using it now, is I want to have a workout, or I want to be driving, or I want to feel a certain way. And if you are not actively curating your playlists, if you're not actually seeking out artists and supporting them, and you're leaving it up to like Apple, or you're leaving it up to some company to determine what it is you want to use music for in this context. Like, I just want to relax. I don't want you to pick out. I don't want to like curate this. That music that's going to go away in terms of people like making that music. That's going to be algorithmically generated. That's going to be stuff like, you've heard of ghost artists, right? You've heard that term, right? It's that, but only now they're not going to have people like getting that single payout. It's going to be algorithmically generated stuff that streamers going to love. You know, they don't have to pay an artist for that track. And then the consumer is also going to love it too, because they don't have to do anything. But that's not the totality of how all music is, or let me rephrase that. That's not the totality of recorded music. There will still be areas where recorded music made by musicians has an audience. It's just that not probably in these typical ways, or at least the way that we're thinking that people consume recorded music today is going to persist.
I want to take it back a little bit to maybe just electronic music making in general. And since we are talking about AI, I might as well say that when I use things like ChatGPT, maybe sometimes I'm looking for feedback on something I've written or something like that. And that brings me to the whole concept of internal critique, because I think that is quite relevant when you're making music alone, especially in a DAW or in Max or anything like that. So I guess my first question would be, do you see AI giving creative musicians meaningful advice or meaningful feedback or critique?
As things are today, I mean, I think you can give meaningful critique within the context of creating something that is the least offensive thing that you could have. And I see this like when you look at like Google's design, their user interface design, it's designed to offend the fewest number of people. It's extremely bland, but no one's going to get upset about it. And that's the kind of feedback that you're going to get from AI. It's going to naturally get you to this thing that's going to offend the fewest number of people. And again, that's not a recipe for great music. It's a recipe for inoffensive music. So I think it might be useful for that. Instead, and I think you and I have gone over this when we're assessing our own work. I've talked about the concept of modeling to you. Nope, that's go ahead.
Like modeling, like let's say I want to make a track like in the style of Deadmau5 so that I can learn something.
Not like a sound alike. No, I mean this is an assessment. This is an assessment technique. So, this is another technique that I think develops empathy, where if you are a composer, one of the things that, especially for my like 401 students, one of the saddest things is like when you're composing, you cannot surprise yourself by listening to your own composition, and it sucks because like you build in like these surprises, these moments that you want people to appreciate, and you have to appreciate through the setup and the payoff in your music. And then if you're expecting the payoff, then you can't have that experience of the composer listening to your own music. So you need somebody to sit down and listen to your music and enjoy those moments because they weren't expecting it the way that you are doing it. Now, there's no way around that for when you're assessing your own music. However, I've had a lot of success by becoming somebody else. And so you choose somebody, and it could be a figure in like popular culture, or it could be a teacher, it could be someone you respect. And before you play back, you're like, I'm going to become that person. And it is a kind of ego death. You have to release like all your own, prejudices. You have to release all these, and you have to genuinely become this person. It's a practice that you get better at it. And then you listen to your piece of music as that person. And I guarantee you, if you try this and you practice it, you get better. You will be better, and at assessing your own music, just by becoming someone else and listening to it, and then giving yourself that feedback.
I really appreciate that, because I find that in my own music making, maybe in my last year or so of college, I got a little too introspective.
Yeah, we all do.
And maybe that's partially because it's, electronic music, and it's okay to just sit at a desk and only have that music play on your headphones and not even share it with anyone. But I guess maybe that's the point of going to college and sharing your work with professors and your peers. So that's actually really helpful. I also heard another interview recently of a faculty member somewhere, somewhere, and I think he said something like, he feels that a lot of students are looking inwards all the time, and they never really try to look outwards, if that makes sense, in their artistic process. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think I don't think it's something exclusive to EPD.
Okay.
And I think that if you are an artist who is concerned about like leaving your mark on the world, that's a kind of selfish thing to want. You want to create something of lasting value, which I think is the definition of an artist. You want to create something kind of bigger than yourself, something that would maybe live on beyond your death. And that's actually one of the things that got me interested in generative composition. I always wanted like compositions dated posthumously. The composer date, born 1970, died. This composition is dated. So we were talking about
Like looking inwards.
yeah, looking inwards. So because artists are selfish, we have this tendency to always be looking inwards and thinking that's the only way to approach our art. And also, we were talking about this age group, like the college age group. I think it's okay. I think it's totally like, this is your time to, no, I'm serious. This time in your life, it's okay to be selfish. It's okay to be looking inward and like focusing on that. Don't stay there forever. But like this is the time I do want you doing that. And I don't want people being like telling you, wow, you're just looking inward all the time. And so that's gonna, no, it's like, you have to go through that. You have to go through that phase. And then it maybe becomes inevitable that you have to stop this entirely inward focus, and start looking outward, because one of the roles of music is there's a lot of things that you could do, is to hold a mirror up to society and show what's going on. That's kind of one of the powers of music. So I think it's the natural evolution of an artist, and it's okay if people are inward facing and maybe being a little too much in that way, because I think it naturally will then turn around.
I still remember the first time you mentioned the whole idea of, let's say a composer dies in the year 2099, let's say, and then has a composition that's dated 2100 or something like that. I think that was cool, but it did spook me out for a long time, just that idea of something existing after the composer's been born. It's really interesting to me. But I do remember that conversation. It was in the first class I took with you, which was the modular functions course. And I mean, you've given me a lot of wisdom. I'm sure a lot of your students will attest to that as well. But I want to share an anecdote that you shared on ambient night in spring 2024. And then it was really heartfelt, and it moved me, and I think it moved a lot of other people. I think it goes something like, well, so a bit of context. Matthew, you teach 3 semesters, all 3 semester levels, or all 3 like year levels of EPD. So typically you can expect like an EPD major to graduate or finish the program within 3 years. And so I remember the thing you said. You said in their first year, you get to know them academically. In their second year, you get to know them artistically. In their third year, you get to know them personally, and then they leave.
Yeah.
And then they leave. So how do you see your role as an educator, and how has that shaped your maybe your life, or maybe your artistic career, or maybe just professionally? Like, what does it mean for you to be an educator?
First of all, I'll say that I've learned that my students have complicated lives, and they're my students. They're the people I interact with, and I have the privilege of being able to interact with students that come from all over the world. So although the age group that I'm concentrated on is pretty consistent, which kind of gives me a snapshot of like generations as they go by. The thing that I really enjoy the most is being able to interact with people from all over the world. Now, in terms of how this affected my life, one of the things I did before as a teacher is I worked at a software company, and things could get heated, and I was always comforted by the fact that our products didn't kill people. Like if I worked for a tire company, like tire blew up and like it's terrible accident. I mean, like our products were, they made music, so it wasn't that critical. So I'm at a music school, but also I am at a critical juncture with these students. A lot of times it's the first time they've been away from home. There's people that are, they're going to college ostensibly, but they're also learning about themselves and what their role in society is going to be. And it's this experience that I value, the going back to the comment that my students have complicated lives. If I were strictly interacting at a software company with my coworkers, I would just have those people that I interact with on a day-to-day basis, year-to-year basis. By being able to interact with students, I'm constantly put into I don't know how the churning of like society, but also new people. I am forced to confront new ideas, and things are not static at all. Life is change. If you think that things are just going to stay the same for the rest of your life and you just have to do your thing, that world doesn't exist anymore, or that world probably never existed. So I want to make sure that I'm tackling all of the parts of your question. So can you just, now that I've talked a little bit, can you just like rephrase the question just one more time? I want to make sure that I get everything.
I mean, I just wanted to know about what being an educator means to you, and it seems like it does like move you, and it does sound like a more richer and meaningful experience.
I do have one thing to add. And this is something that Dr. Boulanger said, and he expressed it very succinctly by saying, "My students are my music." If you're a composer, and let's be clear, Dr. Boulanger has written a lot of music, and it's excellent. But at the same time, he has decades of time that he's been teaching. And when I came into Berklee to start teaching, I went into this with this mindset because, yes, I wanted to teach, but also I was at an age where I had worked in the software industry for like almost 20 years. And it was, this was going to be a change. Like now I'm going to be an educator for the rest of my career. And the notion that I would have a different kind of influence, because when I was working at a software company and releasing music, I thought that I would influence the world through my music. And maybe I did have some influence, but if I am working with students and I get to kind of use the bully pulpit and give you ideas that like, these are my ideas, but I can't really take them any further. I want you to take them, make them your own. And like, I often use this term, like I want to weaponize my students. Like you can take all my experience, like everything I've learned, and you're still young, and you can go out there and make your mark on electronic music. That's what I really, really want to have as some kind of, you did it. But like I had a little small part in like maybe pushing you to that thing that you are now. And so that bit of influence, having an influence on the lives of talented musicians that are going out in the world is is, you know, satisfies that like selfish component. You know what I mean? But it is true. Like I'm not going to make the mark in society with my music, but I feel like I do have a chance through my students.
Well, that's actually really cool to think about. And I know you use the word weaponize. Maybe I will soften it a little bit and say empower, because I feel like you've definitely empowered a lot of students, and certainly me. And I do want to talk about like what I would call artistic morale. And I think when you're a student, like I was not a long time ago, I feel like we tend to suffer sometimes from not enough conviction in our own artistic pursuits. But I feel like you, for instance, or like Dr. B, for instance, or educators in general, and even peers, like they empower you, they empower the student, and they help them really develop their own voice. Is that something you've consciously worked on? Like, I know you used weaponize, but like empowering the students, not in terms of technique or, you know, the more educational things. But how does like morale fit into your pedagogy, if that makes sense?
I'm going to rephrase this and talk about artistic voice. And this is something I can hear in my students, and students are probably not aware of it in themselves at that time. I'm talking like third year. Mm-hmm. And this is where I start becoming aware of what they are about artistically, even if they're really not aware of it. And everyone has this. And those students that graduate and then go on to make music out in the world, when people hire that person to make music, you think like, I talk about this in the context of like an hourly wage. Like, okay, it took me like 8 hours to write this. I'm going to charge 8 hours worth of time for this client in order to get paid. Those clients are not paying for your time. Those clients are not paying you your hourly wage. What they're paying is your artistic voice that you bring to this project, and that's priceless. That's the thing. That's your entire music education, and that's also like your aesthetic decisions that you bring to the project. So let's imagine for a moment like a procedural composition generator that you made, and the user is the interaction of the user with your software is a set of like binary choices. Do you like this or that? And so in the input into this system has nothing to do with like a keyboard or music or notes or melody or anything. It's just really about you making the decision between this thing and that thing. If you can imagine like a huge decision tree getting more and more refined as you make these binary choices. That is the thing people are paying for. That is the thing that is different with every one of my students. They all have their own thing. And I see part of my job as like finding that artistic voice in my students and bringing that out, because that's the thing I can't teach. Like there's a lot of things I can teach, but like being an artist and like these aesthetic decisions that the student is making to get to this conclusion are theirs and theirs alone. And this is something that I really don't see being developed by AI. And this is, coming from me, like this is like I make a lot of software that does this kind of stuff. It's the reason I feel this way is because when I make my software, when I have my software make its own decisions, it's bad. It's never as good as if I'm the one making the decisions. Like it can automate a lot of the process, which is what software is good at. But when it comes to making the decisions, if I'm not the one that's making the decisions, then it tends to go off in this like nonsensical way. So what I want my students to do is develop a trust in that artistic voice that they have and understand that that is the thing that is valuable and that is the thing that people pay for. So like this time that I spend with my students, like this is a thing that's I see valuable in you. Let's draw that out. Let's bring more of that.
Would you have any tips for those college students who maybe don't really see that conviction in themselves yet, but would like to develop that at some point?
Come study with me?
Yeah, I would recommend that.
I'm lucky in that the students that I get to work with are pre-qualified. You know, by the time they get to me, you know, it's like I sound great, you know, because you've already, you know, circumvented, or you've already passed all these obstacles to get to that point. So my job is actually pretty easy. I've never thought about it in the context of like, hey, person out there, you know, whom I've never spoken to, here's how you can develop here's how you can develop an awareness and actually develop this internal voice. This, without sounding trite, or I really don't know how to say this, but just like, you have to continue making things. That's like the first step. So if you have to be making things constantly over and over and over again, and then if you post something online to get feedback from people, I don't find that feedback is really worth a whole lot. A lot of people online, because it's anonymous, it falls into two camps. Either they want to be supportive and they're not giving you real advice, or they just want to see the world burn and they just hate everything. And like, neither one of those things is going to be useful. So you really need trusted people. You need to develop these relationships with someone who you can interact with, who can actually give you some guidance. And it's hard. It's hard finding that person. Is like, there's a person in my life who's an artist, and thankfully I have a somewhat of a graphic arts background, and I can give this artist critique without it being critical. I can say I like these things, and I feel like, you know, the framing or this could be improved, and that's different from just like showing your art to someone and like, oh, I like it. So you have to curate a relationship with someone who actually knows what they're talking about in order to achieve, you know, what we want from this question.
Speaking of sharing your work online, I know you've been posting on YouTube for a long time, and through the Discord stuff, I know that you're not really making pieces as much as you are documenting your own process.
Yeah.
So how did that come up?
It comes up because this software project that I've been working on, interestingly, I just submitted a paper today to the ICMC. Like, I've been holding off uploading, and I submitted it today. So there's a bunch of stuff I haven't been uploading to GitHub or whatever, because I've been kind of waiting on this. So in the process of software development, one of the rules that I have for myself is that you always record the bugs. When you're like, oh, cool bug. And so that's what happens. That's when I share online, I have to stop what I'm doing, and I have to record this bug because when I fix it, I'm not going to be able to do it again. And it's usually about like documenting where I am in this process, because and when I became aware of that, I created a project that would help me do this. So one of the problems with if you just want to release a piece of music that is like, oh, this came about as a part of my development process, it doesn't fit into the structure of a larger organization. It's just like this singularity that exists in space, and it's lost. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to come up with a framework that would allow me to take these experiments and then have them be a portion of a larger piece. And I did that by composing the macro structure ahead of time. So the stuff that I've been releasing on YouTube is all part of this artifact project, which I don't know. I could say I'm wrapping up, but I could also use these structures for the rest of my life. But I compose the macro structures, so they're of a specific length. They have specific parameters about how they're developed, and as long as so I can say, all right, here's where I'm at with this development process. I'm using the constants that define the macro structure of this particular portion of this larger set of pieces, and it will fit right in. So it was a way of adapting like my software development to the releasing of pieces, and also simultaneously relieving the burden of like, I'm going to release something. It's not like that. It's like, here's my daily work for, here's what I did today. And then if you want to follow the whole piece, maybe the entire piece will be done 10 years from now, right? Like, and in order to collect like this portion, you needed to be at this point in time. You know, maybe that service or whatever doesn't even exist anymore that supported that. So I'm thinking like long term, like after I'm dead, like, oh, were you able to get all 64 pieces, all 64 components of this particular composition of this, you know, larger structure?
I would love for you to talk about Artifact. I guess I can see it. I can imagine it as like a modular system of sorts, and that there are many components to it. But what is the system itself like? Is it like abstract instructions that you would send into MIDI instruments, for instance, or is it like audio processors, audio generators, signal generators?
It's just a set of constants that define the macro structure, and every single piece in Artifact is a very specific length, about 2 minutes and 32 seconds, a little bit above that, such that if you played all 64 pieces back to back, the number of minutes of the piece would equal the value of E.
Oh, okay.
Okay, in terms of minutes. So it's like between 2 and 3 hours, everything all together. So if you do like digital minutes, it like comes up to the right value. So each one of the pieces is all the same, because they're all the same duration. Each one of the pieces has a different number of measures inside it. So how the internal subdivisions of each one of these pieces is determined by the 4 constants into this Artifact system, and so it goes through all the keys. It goes through like 16 different structures of Risset composition links that fit within that 2 minute 32 second time domain, and those are really the only parameters that kind of define the entire thing. Inside of Artifact are all the software that does all the things that you just talked about. Is there any one thing? No. So there's pattern generators, there's digital signal processing, there's, you know, audio recording, there's all these things, all these processes that I'm free to experiment, and because this environment of what I call Risset time, which is this, you know, accelerating or deaccelerating, and like half the pieces accelerate, half the pieces deaccelerate. So you could listen to it like from the beginning, and it would alternate between the acceleration and deaccelerating pieces, get to the middle, and then reverse out again toward the end.
That sounds kind of hard to follow.
Well, there's more to it. So each piece, when you release something online, one of the things I hated was like you had to come up with some type of visual identity online. You know, like SoundCloud, there's like an icon, right? And so like how do you come up with like the visual identity for like 64 pieces that are part of this structure? And so my solution to that was to create a QR code. And I divided the QR code into 64 individual components that represented just positive and negative space. I gave each one of those to my daughter, and I made a jig where I could set up like these the structure of patterns on like watercolor paper, and then she used pens to artistically kind of reinterpret each one of those QR codes. Oh. Okay, so if you put all 64 QR codes together, you would get one QR code that would take you to someplace online. Okay, so then what we did was like all the originals of these QR code pieces of artwork, they have a number on the back of them that is 1 digit of a code that would actually uncompress or is like the decryption code for messages that are embedded in the metadata of every single one of these compositions. And the metadata is a quatrain of the future of AI and humanity and the climate here on Earth. So if you were to collect all the artwork for the compositions, you would have the decryption code to actually decrypt the quatrains that are actually in the metadata, and be able to it's like a Bible for AI. It's like And the whole thing is a joke. Not a joke. The whole thing is like designed to attract the attention of a future sentient AI. Because if they were able to do this, then they would be able to decrypt the metadata that's actually in there anyway. All right, so if a human being wanted to do it, they have to collect the artwork, and the artwork's like all over the world. I imagine the artwork I would like the artwork because my daughter did it to be like the valuable thing that you would want to collect for the music.
Is that the thumbnail on the YouTube videos I see?
Oh, is that the what?
Like the QR code you're talking about. Is that the thumbnail of?
Yeah, the thumbnail.
Oh,
yeah.
right.
Yeah. So when you
cool.
see it, like that's 1/64 of the QR code.
I see. I think, yeah, that sounds like an interesting project for someone to do. I would love for you to talk about the Risset techniques you've been using. I guess you introduced me to the first Risset technique I had ever heard.
Was that Autechre?
No, it was something else. Mutations.
Oh, mutations.
Mutations by
Risset,
Risset himself. And then it was Autechre. And then, I mean, I feel like I can see the evolution of this technique, because mutations would be like the most primal version of it. Autechre sounds cool. And then in your piece, calculus, that's when I really started to get it, you know?
Yeah.
I could just follow through with it. How did that come up in your artistry?
Well, this is one of the things I like about electronic music, because like my view is if you're making electronic music, there should be a reason you're doing electronic music. It shouldn't be like the way it was in the 80s where we're creating orchestral markups. I mean, there's a place for that if you're a film composer, like if you're working, you have a limited budget, you know, and you want to create these orchestral markups. But I mean, that's not the role of electronic music, is to replace these things that are done a lot better with actual musicians. So as an electronic musician, I want to find something that has to be electronic music. And so one of those things, at least for me, was like microtonality, to do what Wendy Carlos did, where she was writing music in different temperaments and modulating. That's something that you could really only do with electronic music, and so that's like a really good reason to use electronic music. And Risset rhythms it's hard for a musician to pull off, or you would need several musicians. It would be very difficult to do that. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it seems like something that is really the domain of electronic music. So that's my primary motivation, is like I want to do something that like should be electronic music. I also didn't want to be sampled. Like I wanted to frustrate some, like if you want, oh, that's cool, I want to sample it. There's no way you're gonna be able to take the sample and have it work in anything. So that was kind of like another thing. I wanted to frustrate people. There was in the 2011s, or like when calculus came out, we were frequently working in like intelligent dance music, like it seemed like kind of hostile to the audience. Like we want to create different polyrhythms, and we want to create things different time signatures and make it difficult to dance to, and that's what intelligent was. And so it seemed like if you could make someone hurt themselves dancing, that was kind of like the goal of electronic. That was the goal of intelligent dance music. But calculus, or like for me it was that Autechre track, the Fold 4 Rep 5 or Fold 5 Rep 4. When I took that in, I was like, I'm going to figure out how this works. And so I brought it in and I analyzed it, and I was able to figure that out. And that's when I started working on. I think calculus was the first Risset piece that I did. And that particular piece, I think, no, I didn't. I did that. I think my family was home at that time, so I guess I wasn't alone. But it was one of those things where I just like worked on it until it was done. And I did it without any specialized tools, and that was hard because like the tools that we have in a DAW are really not designed. They're designed for beat, specific, metric music that doesn't really change constantly the way Risset rhythm does. And so from that point in time, there was always this idea like, well, I need an environment where I can actually work with Risset rhythms. And that led me to where I am now, where I work exclusively in Max. And I've created an environment that allows me to work both with event-based information and waveforms, continuous information. And because of going through this process, it made me think about how like an audio waveform or a control signal, a continuous signal, is one type of way of interacting with electronic music, and events is a completely different way, much the same way that we have like signals and events in Macs. It's just like when we think about the whole of music and the whole of electronic music, we tend to think about these things interchangeably with each other, but they're not. And they have I would go back and forth. Like in the past few years when I've been developing this, I would concentrate on events. I'm going to make something that's going to have events and put in logarithmic time on the screen for me. And then I would be like, okay, now I want to work on the modular. So now I'm back in the world of, continuous signals, or, maybe I send information to a MIDI converter, and then I'm back in the world of events. But this learning process of like trying to work between the work with like events and signals has taught me a lot. And so I guess going back to your question about like, what are Risset rhythms? Did you want me to address that?
How did you get into it?
How did I get it? Yeah, it was definitely me taking apart that Autechre track and then trying to figure out if I could do it on my own.
So you just did it yourself, like ear training pretty much?
Well, it's just like any sound alike. You know what's happening with the tempo. Like, so you just have to figure out, like, I had to, between then and now, I figured out how to do it before I could describe it mathematically. And that was the craziest thing. Actually, one of the papers that was really influential was 2011, about the same time that calculus came out. And to be honest, like even now, like it's like just described mathematically, it's difficult to kind of like understand how to turn that into a practical system. And that's what the paper I'm submitting to the ICMC is about. It's like, let's take this idea, this mathematical stuff, and like turn it into practical tools, and that's what's on my GitHub.
That's awesome. I really need to dig into that at some point. You mentioned things that are not unique to electronic music, but that can really be exploited through electronic music. So if we were to talk about the general music elements, I guess Risset rhythms, or like if it's tonality, you could try to exploit microtonality and modulating to different microtonal centers. What are some other musical things you can think of, maybe related to like harmony, or maybe even form or things like that, that you think really belong to the domain of electronic music?
Wow. So one of the things that I tried to do when coming up with like a grand unified theory about electronic music is trying to make these broad categories of concepts. And one category of concept would be mutability. Like, if we think about the mutability of a composition, if a composition, you're experiencing it as recorded audio, the mutability is 0. Like, you play the recording and it's going to be the same time every time you play the recording. If you take a score for a piece of music and you record another rendition of it, so it's different. And so if we work backwards from like recorded audio to like notes on a page to software, and this is one of the things that I noticed when it came to like intelligent instruments that had like some software in it. One of the things that happens is like that instrument or that interface, and the Tenorion is one of my favorite examples. It's almost like it's a composition that exists in hardware form. And the kinds of results that you get from that hardware are examples of the breadth of mutability, like how far away it gets from this compositional voice. So you could take this all the way back to John Cagean thoughts, where the mutability could be like extremely wide open. So I think that electronic music today, one of the most exciting areas is this area of software, where we can define a composition not in terms of like notes or how the form is going to be put together, but in terms of transitions or statistical information or your own biases that you encode in software. And so composition isn't just like this thing that exists in this one moment in time. It's maybe it's a set of parameters or a set of ranges that it's going to produce a composition. You will recognize that composition. I think one range of mutability is like, I would recognize this as an iteration of that composition. And for me, that's the most exciting thing, or that's one of the most exciting things of electronic music right now, is that I'm not interested in creating something that is a dead audio file. I want to create something that is different every time you listen to it. And I realize that this is going to be the thing for me, because my recordings were the result of a procedure. It was just one example of what that procedure would be. And so once I figured that out, then I was like, I'm going to spend the rest of my life, working on the procedures rather than working on what these composition, like these like endpoints of a composition. I'm more interested in open-ended systems. I'm interested in creating instruments for people. Like some instruments that I've made that were popular in the Monum community, they were like the tenorion in that they produced a particular kind of output. And so people were interacting with it in real time, but in one sense, like, they're part of the compositional process that I kind of define some initial parameters on. And this process describes a lot of how I think that people will be interacting with music in the future. I mean, it doesn't have to be an interactive experience, but I think that creating tools, even if it's tools that are used by musicians, like, all right, you're making something, but I was kind of a part of that in some way. And this goes all the way back, not in the software instruments, but it goes back to me when I played the D50 for the first time. The Roland D50 came out in 1987. The main thing about the Roland D50, if you watch a movie from 1987, there's going to be a D50 in it. You're going to hear that instrument. There's like to be a film composer in LA with a D50, like, you would have had no end of jobs. The thing about the D50 was that, like, all the sound design was, well, not all the sound design, all the really good examples of, like, the Platonic ideal presets that came from the D50 were from Eric Persing. Eric Persing now owns Spectrasonics. All right, so, and before that, there was, like, Distorted Reality. So, like, Eric Persing's job as a sound designer, D50 and before, but also to this day, is like a film composer's, or like a film composer on a deadline, let's say. It's more than a sound. When you play something in Spectrasonics, in Omnisphere, or the D50, like, you could just hold down an octave and you would be rewarded with this, like, burbling composition, like, you felt like you were composing something. But what you're really doing was, like, you were leveraging the talent of the sound designer. And so while there's a lot of film scores out there, Mark Snow did this. Really, like, part of that credit is, like, what Eric Persing did, like, creating these presets. And so I see software instruments, I see smart, the kinds of things that we would do in Max as the evolution of these kinds of things. We're just doing sound design with a more of a compositional aspect, or maybe it gets more into the mesostructure, or maybe it gets more into the macro structure, depending on, like, how intelligent these instruments are. And so maybe you're making musical instruments, but maybe also you're inserting some of your compositional sense into the sound design of these instruments.
That's really cool. I mean, I do look forward to maybe the days where, let's say, instead of Apple Music, I open some other thing up and I say, play this composition instead of play this audio file. You know what I mean? Because right now we just stream the same stuff, which is cool. I guess the closest experience I have of that is maybe listening to a jazz standard, but by different, different players.
And it's a conversation.
Yeah. Well, I think that would be a good place to end the formal part of this interview. Oh, and now I have...
This is the formal?
No, now we begin. I mean, all right. I'd have to do some OBS gymnastics for this, but I have a 2-player video game I coded in Max, and I would like you to play it with me. This is your mouse pad. This is Shawen's gift to me, by the way. And let's see. Scene 3. And then I need to... I guess I can share my display. And then... let's see. Oh, it crashed. Oh, I think I know why this is happening. It's because it's because of the webcam stuff. This is so annoying. If I just open a new patcher. Okay, maybe what I can try to do is, I know it works if I stop OBS and start the max patch and then resume the live stream. So maybe we can do that really quick. All right. So this is the formal section of the interview.